Aegon the Conqueror, also known as Aegon the Dragon, is the founding king of the Targaryen dynasty and the man who united 6 of the 7 kingdoms under one crown. Before Aegon's conquest, Westeros was divided into 7 independent kingdoms, each ruled by their own royal house, constantly warring with one another for territory and power. Aegon changed everything when he landed at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush with his 2 sister wives, Visenya and Rhaenys, and their 3 dragons, Balerion, the Black Dread, Vhagar, and Meraxes. Aegon's military genius wasn't just about brute force, it was about strategic dominance. The dragons gave him an overwhelming advantage that no army could match. During the Field of Fire, Aegon and his sisters incinerated thousands of soldiers from the combined armies of the Reach and the Rock, forcing both kingdoms to bend the knee. The North, the Riverlands, the Stormlands, the Vale, and the Iron Islands all eventually submitted to Aegon's rule, either through battle or diplomacy. Only Dorne resisted, refusing to be conquered even after Aegon's dragons burned their castles and killed thousands. Aegon established King's Landing as his capital, building the Red Keep and the Iron Throne itself, forged from the swords of his defeated enemies and shaped by dragonfire. His reign was marked by consolidation and the establishment of laws that would govern Westeros for centuries. Aegon was a pragmatic ruler who understood that conquest was only the beginning. Maintaining power required respect, fear, and the cooperation of the lords he had defeated. He allowed the great houses to keep their lands and titles, demanding only their loyalty and taxes. Aegon's downfall never truly came in the traditional sense. He died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 64, having ruled for 37 years. His legacy, however, was the burden placed on his descendants, the expectation that they would maintain the unity he had forged through fire and blood. The dragons that gave the Targaryens their power would eventually become their curse, and the seeds of madness that ran through their bloodline would haunt generations to come. Jaehaerys the Conciliator is widely regarded as the greatest king Westeros has ever seen, a ruler whose wisdom and temperament brought prosperity and peace to the realm for over 5 decades. Ascending to the throne after the chaotic reign of his uncle Maegor the Cruel, Jaehaerys inherited a kingdom on the brink of collapse, with the faith militant in open rebellion and the nobility questioning Targaryen rule. Where Maegor used brutality and terror, Jaehaerys chose diplomacy and reform. One of Jaehaerys' first acts was to reconcile with the faith of the Seven, ending the religious conflict that had plagued his predecessors. He made peace with the High Septon, convincing the faith to accept Targaryen incestuous marriages in exchange for the crown's protection and support. This agreement, known as the Doctrine of Exceptionalism, declared that the Targaryens were above the laws of men due to their dragon blood, a compromise that secured religious stability for generations. Jaehaerys also abolished the hated first night custom, where lords could claim the right to bed common women on their wedding nights, earning him the love and loyalty of the small folk. Jaehaerys' reign saw the construction of the King's Road, a massive network of roads connecting the entire realm, facilitating trade, communication, and military movement. He established the first unified code of laws for Westeros, ensuring that justice was administered fairly across all regions. His sister wife, Queen Alysanne, was his closest advisor and partner in governance, and together they toured the realm regularly, listening to the grievances of lords and commoners alike. Jaehaerys' wisdom extended to matters of succession as well, as he convened the Great Council of 101 AC to resolve disputes over the Iron Throne, setting a precedent for democratic decision-making among the nobility. Despite his long and prosperous reign, Jaehaerys' later years were marked by personal tragedy. He outlived most of his children, watching as death claimed his heirs one by one. His wife Alysanne became distant and bitter after the death of their daughter, and Jaehaerys grew increasingly isolated and melancholic. By the time of his death at the age of 69, after ruling for 55 years, the realm he had built so carefully was already beginning to fracture. The succession crisis that followed would ignite the Dance of the Dragons, a civil war that nearly destroyed House Targaryen entirely. Viserys I was a kind and gentle king who loved feasts, tournaments, and his family more than he loved the responsibilities of ruling. Chosen by the Great Council over his cousin Rhaenys, Viserys inherited a stable and prosperous realm from his grandfather Jaehaerys. His reign began with great promise, as he maintained the peace and continued the reforms of his predecessor. Viserys was generous to his friends and loyal to his advisors, particularly his hand, Otto Hightower, who guided much of the kingdom's policy during the early years of his rule. However, Viserys's greatest strength, his desire to keep everyone happy, became his most fatal flaw. After the death of his first wife, Aemma Arryn, Viserys remarried to Alicent Hightower, Otto's daughter, a decision that created a dangerous division within his own family. Viserys had already named his daughter Rhaenyra as his heir, a controversial choice that defied centuries of Westerosi tradition favoring male primogeniture. When Alicent bore him sons, Aegon, Aemond, and Daeron, the question of succession became a powder keg waiting to explode. Viserys refused to address the growing tension between Rhaenyra's faction and Alicent's faction, the Blacks and the Greens, believing that his love for both his daughter and his wife would somehow prevent conflict. He turned a blind eye to the scheming of his court, the ambitions of his second son Aemond, and the increasing hostility between his children. Viserys's refusal to decisively settle the succession or remove potential threats meant that upon his death, both sides believed they had legitimate claims to the throne. Viserys's downfall was his passivity and his unwillingness to confront uncomfortable truths. He died a slow, painful death from an unknown illness that rotted his body over years, leaving him weak and bedridden. In his final moments, he was surrounded by Alicent and her allies, who seized the opportunity to crown Aegon II as king, directly defying Viserys's wishes. The civil war that erupted, the Dance of the Dragons, killed nearly all the Targaryen dragons and decimated the royal family, all because Viserys couldn't bring himself to make the hard choices necessary to preserve his legacy. Aegon II is one of the most controversial kings in Targaryen history, a man who plunged the realm into civil war by seizing the throne from his half-sister Rhaenyra. Upon the death of King Viserys, Aegon was crowned in the dragon pit by his mother Alicent and the Greens, who argued that no woman should sit the Iron Throne and that Aegon, as the eldest living son, was the rightful heir. This act of usurpation ignited the Dance of the Dragons, the bloodiest conflict House Targaryen had ever faced. Aegon's reign was defined entirely by war. He was not a skilled warrior or a brilliant tactician, but he was stubborn and determined to hold on to power at any cost. His younger brother Aemond, riding the massive dragon Vhagar, became the Greens' most dangerous weapon, while Aegon himself rode Sunfire the Golden into battle. The war saw horrific atrocities on both sides, with dragons fighting dragons, and entire cities burned to the ground. Aegon suffered terrible injuries during the Battle of Rook's Rest when he and his dragon were attacked by Rhaenyra's forces, leaving him crippled and scarred. Despite his injuries, Aegon's forces eventually gained the upper hand. Rhaenyra was betrayed and captured, and Aegon had her fed to his dragon Sunfire in front of her own son, a brutal execution that solidified his reputation as a tyrant. However, Aegon's victory was hollow. His brothers were dead, his dragons were dead, and the realm was in ruins. The small folk hated him, the nobility distrusted him, and even his own supporters began to question his rule. Aegon's downfall came not from his enemies but from his own allies. He was poisoned by his own men, likely on the orders of those who saw him as a liability to the restoration of peace. His death ended the Dance of the Dragons, but the damage was done. The Targaryen dragons were nearly extinct, the royal family was shattered, and the realm would take decades to recover. Aegon II's legacy is one of destruction and division, a cautionary tale of what happens when ambition and pride override wisdom and duty. Aegon III, known as the Dragonbane and the Broken King, ascended to the Iron Throne as a traumatized child who had witnessed the horrors of the Dance of the Dragons firsthand. The son of Rhaenyra Targaryen, Aegon watched his mother be devoured by his uncle's dragon, an event that scarred him psychologically for life. His reign began with a regency council ruling in his name, as he was only 10 years old when crowned, and the realm was still reeling from the devastation of civil war. Aegon's early years as king were marked by his complete withdrawal from the responsibilities of ruling. He was a silent, melancholic boy who showed no interest in governance, feasts, or the trappings of power. The Regency Council struggled to rebuild the kingdom while dealing with the young king's depression and the absence of dragons, which had all died during or shortly after the dance. Aegon earned the nickname Dragonbane because the last Targaryen dragon died during his reign, marking the end of an era and the beginning of Targaryen decline. As Aegon grew older, he remained emotionally distant and detached, going through the motions of kingship without passion or engagement. He married multiple times in an attempt to secure heirs, but his relationships were cold and loveless. The realm during his reign was relatively peaceful, but only because it was too exhausted from war to fight. Aegon's administration focused on recovery and rebuilding infrastructure, trade, and the treasury, but the king himself took little personal interest in these efforts. Aegon's downfall was not a dramatic event, but a slow fade into irrelevance. He died of consumption at the age of 36, having ruled for 26 years but never truly living. His reign is remembered as a period of recovery, but also of lost potential. The dragons were gone, the Targaryen mystique was fading, and Aegon's inability to inspire or lead left the dynasty vulnerable to future challenges. His legacy is one of survival rather than triumph, a king who kept the throne warm but never made it his own. Daeron II, known as the Good King, was a scholar, diplomat, and reformer who brought Dawn into the Seven Kingdoms through marriage rather than conquest, achieving what Aegon the Conqueror could not. Daeron inherited a troubled realm from his father Aegon IV, whose corrupt and incompetent reign had left the kingdom bankrupt and the nobility divided. Where his father was lecherous and cruel, Daeron was virtuous and wise, dedicating himself to healing the wounds his father had inflicted. Daeron's greatest achievement was the peaceful integration of Dawn into the realm. Through careful negotiation and a marriage alliance between himself and Princess Myria Martell, Daeron convinced the Dornish to join the Seven Kingdoms as equals rather than conquered subjects. This union finally brought true peace to the southern border and united all of Westeros under one crown. Daeron also married his sister Daenerys to the Prince of Dawn, further cementing the alliance and earning him the gratitude of both Dornish and Westerosi nobles, who were tired of endless border conflicts. Daeron's reign saw cultural and intellectual flourishing. He was a patron of arts and learning, inviting maesters, poets, and scholars to court, and encouraging the spread of knowledge throughout the realm. He reformed the legal system, reduced corruption, and strengthened the authority of the crown through diplomacy rather than force. His rule was marked by prosperity and stability, with the realm experiencing economic growth and relative peace for the first time in generations. However, Daeron's downfall came from within his own family. His legitimization of his father's bastards, particularly Daemon Blackfyre, created a rival claimant to the throne. Rumors spread that Daeron himself was not Aegon IV's true son, but rather the product of his mother's affair with her brother, Prince Aemon the Dragon Knight. These whispers, combined with resentment from nobles who felt that Daeron's Dornish connections gave too much power to foreigners, led to the First Blackfyre Rebellion. Though Daeron's forces won the war, the conflict claimed thousands of lives and created a lasting division that would haunt House Targaryen for generations. Daeron died in his bed, but his legacy was tarnished by the civil war that his father's mistakes had set in motion. Aerys II, the Mad King, is perhaps the most infamous Targaryen ruler, whose descent into paranoia and cruelty led directly to the fall of House Targaryen and Robert's rebellion. Aerys began his reign with promise and ambition, dreaming of great reforms and grand projects that would restore Targaryen glory. He was handsome, charismatic, and initially popular with both the nobility and the small folk, earning him goodwill and optimism for his rule. However, Aerys's mental state deteriorated rapidly after a series of personal tragedies and political setbacks. The defiance of Duskendale, where he was held captive by a minor lord for months, shattered his confidence and awakened deep paranoia. He began to see traitors and conspiracies everywhere, trusting no one except his pyromancers and a few sycophants who fed his delusions. Aerys became obsessed with fire, believing himself to be a dragon in human form, immune to flames and destined to transform. He stopped cutting his hair and nails, let his hygiene deteriorate, and grew increasingly violent and erratic. Aerys's reign became a nightmare of arbitrary executions, torture, and madness. He burned men alive for perceived slights, including Lord Rickard Stark, whom he roasted in his own armor while forcing his son Brandon to watch and strangle himself trying to save him. This act of barbarity triggered Robert's rebellion when combined with Prince Rhaegar's abduction of Lyanna Stark. Aerys's response to the rebellion was to plant caches of wildfire throughout King's Landing, planning to burn the entire city and all its inhabitants, rather than lose his throne. His final words, "Burn them all," encapsulated the complete madness that had consumed him. Aerys's downfall came swiftly and brutally. As Robert Baratheon's forces closed in on King's Landing, Aerys ordered his pyromancers to ignite the wildfire and burn the city. Jaime Lannister, a member of the Kingsguard, made the impossible choice to break his sacred vows and kill the king he had sworn to protect, stabbing Aerys in the back to save 500,000 people from immolation. Aerys died on the floor of his own throne room, his blood pooling on the stones, bringing an end to nearly 3 centuries of Targaryen rule. His legacy is one of absolute cautionary horror, a reminder of how power and madness can destroy not just a man but an entire dynasty. Aegon V, known as Aegon the Unlikely, was a king who came to the throne against all expectations, the 4th son of a 4th son who never dreamed of wearing the crown. Aegon spent his youth traveling the 7 kingdoms as a squire to Sir Duncan the Tall, experiencing the lives of common people firsthand and developing a deep empathy for the small folk that would define his reign. When he unexpectedly inherited the throne after a series of deaths and the Great Council rejected other candidates, Aegon brought his common touch and reformist ideals to the Iron Throne. Aegon's reign was dedicated to improving the lives of the poor and limiting the power of the great lords. He attempted to pass laws protecting small folk from abuse, regulating the rights of lords over their subjects, and reducing the burden of taxes on the common people. These reforms made him beloved among the peasantry, but earned him enemies among the nobility, who saw his policies as an attack on their ancient privileges. Aegon's children complicated matters further, by refusing the marriages he had arranged for political alliances, instead marrying for love, which weakened the crown's diplomatic position. As Aegon's reforms stalled and his power waned, he became increasingly desperate to restore Targaryen dominance. Obsessed with the prophecy that the prince who was promised would be born from his line, Aegon turned to ancient texts and forbidden knowledge about hatching dragon eggs. He believed that the return of dragons would give him the power to enforce his will and complete his vision of a just realm. Aegon gathered his family and closest allies at Summerhall, where he planned a great ritual to bring dragons back into the world. Aegon's downfall came at the tragedy of Summerhall, a catastrophic fire that consumed the palace and killed the king, his eldest son, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, and many others. The exact details of what happened remain mysterious, but it's believed that Aegon's attempt to hatch dragon eggs went horribly wrong, resulting in an inferno that destroyed everything. Ironically, on the same night Aegon died trying to bring back dragons, his grandson Rhaegar was born in the flames, seemingly fulfilling the prophecy Aegon had been so desperate to see come true. Aegon's legacy is bittersweet. A good man whose noble intentions and desperation for power led to tragedy and the loss of the greatest reformer the Iron Throne had ever seen. And there you have it. 8 of the most significant Targaryen kings, each one a study in power, ambition, and the heavy burden of the crown. From Aegon the Conqueror who forged an empire, to Aerys the Mad King who destroyed it, the Targaryen dynasty's history is filled with triumph and tragedy in equal measure. Let us know in the comments which Targaryen king you think had the greatest impact on Westeros, and what other Game of Thrones content you want us to cover.